drive over to Chick-fil-A and or home. That way we'll have a great rest of
it. Ladies. All right, we're continuing on, as Ashton said, in our study of the life of Moses. So we've been going through the book of Exodus, looking at Moses, looking at his life, looking at some of the key events and interactions that he had, some of the crucial points in his life. The last portion of Exodus, we're not going to cover. It doesn't really show us a whole lot about Moses. What we see there is God, the law that God gave Moses. We talked about Moses going up on Mount Sinai to meet God. And the law that God gave Moses. The end of Exodus and Leviticus contain the details of that law. So we don't really get to know Moses better there. We get to know God really well, but that's kind of a different study, a different focus than we're taking right now. But in that, what we see are what were God's requirements for worship. What did God expect of someone's moral character? How did God expect us? Does God expect us to interact with each other? What are God's standards? That's all spelled out in great detail. And how are the priests supposed to act? And what are the feasts that are to be celebrated? These feasts would be celebrated for the next 1,500 years in Israel's history. And God was laying it all out for them in this. And we see that at the end of Exodus, throughout Leviticus. Tonight, we're going to be in Numbers chapter 11, so if you want to turn there in your Bible. Fourth book in the Bible. So still toward the beginning, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, chapter 11. As we continue, as we keep looking at the life of Moses, this is one of the next key events that we see in his life. In Numbers chapters 1 through 10, it tells us basically about the first year outside of Egypt. And we see a little bit of that in Exodus, but the majority of that year is covered in the beginning of the book of Numbers. And as you read through the first 10 chapters of Numbers, there's kind of this positive trend. You're like, these people actually might pull it off. There's some good things going on here. There's hope for them. And then we get to Numbers 11. But the first 10 chapters in Numbers, there's some really cool things going on. God wants to have a record of who of this generation that he is planning to bring to the promised land. And so they take a census of the people. The tabernacle that God described in great detail in Exodus and Leviticus is built and it's dedicated, and they begin worship of God. Through the tabernacle. The priests are presented to the people, and they become the mediator between God and the people. And they become the ones who offer sacrifices on behalf of the people. The Passover, it's been a year since they left, and God told them, you shall celebrate Passover every year. You should remember this day that I brought you out of Egypt. And so they celebrate that. And really cool news is they've been camped out at Mount Sinai for about a year, and God says, pick up your camp. We're moving, and we're moving closer to the promised land. And so a lot of good signs, a lot of good things going on. In Numbers 10:33, at the end of the previous chapter, it says this, thus they set out from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey, with the ark of the covenant of the Lord journeying in front of them. So that's how they traveled. They followed the presence of God. The Ark of the Covenant was the symbol of God's presence, the pillar of cloud, the pillar of fire. And so they went out on this journey for 3 days to seek out a resting place for them. So after about a year at Mount Sinai, this mountain where Moses had these direct encounters with God, the people actually stood in awe of God's presence on the mountain because the mountain was quaking. The cloud was thick and dark. The trumpet sound was so loud that it was nearly deafening. After about a year of being at that place, they've moved on. And chapter 11 picks up 3 days after they leave Mount Sinai. And what's the first thing we see? We see complaining in the camp. And tonight we're going to look at some rebellion in their camp. But what we're going to see in the first couple verses is complaining in the camp.
Oh my gosh, we're already in Numbers.
I just said that. Did you fall asleep during the?
Yeah, my
Okay. We are in Numbers. Good. So the Numbers 11. So the defining characteristic of this generation of the Israelites going forward is they're complaining. They're complaining. That's kind of their resting pose. You know, have you ever met someone with a resting face? It's just like, oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, it's like I wish they didn't look so angry all the time. You know, that's just
Or the donkey.
they just have a scowl on their faces. It's just how they're not thinking about it, and that's their resting pose. Their resting pose is complaining. Their default mechanism is complaining. And verse 1 tells us they were complaining to each other, and God heard, and God was furious. Moses heard, and Moses was furious. And God brought down judgment on some on the outskirts of the camp, and he brought fire down on them, and many died because of their complaining. But that doesn't stop their complaining. Let's look at verse 4 with me of Numbers chapter 11. The rabble who were among them had greedy desires, and also the sons of Israel wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing at all to look at except this manna." So it starts off talking about the rabble. That's not a very kind way to describe somebody, right? The back row back there, it's the rabble. Okay. That's actually just those who are not Israelites, those who are not descendants of Jacob, those who are not of that line.
The extras, basically.
The others who came along with them. Exodus tells us that when they left, there were others who came along with them and left the land. They all left for their own reasons. Some were maybe servants and they took the opportunity. Everybody's distracted burying their firstborn kids. And so I'm going to leave now. I can get out. There's millions of people leaving. They won't notice me going. They're going to a promised land. This sounds pretty cool. I think I'll go check that out. I'm tired of living in Egypt. Let's go live somewhere else. So that's the rabble is those who came along for the ride, but they aren't there because they have faith in God. They're there for their own reason. They're there for some other motive. There's a warning because this doesn't turn out to be a great event for the nation of Israel. And there's a warning here. Be careful who you let influence your life. Be careful who you let influence and have impact in your life. We tell you all the time, make sure you choose who you hang out with. It's really important to carefully choose who you associate with, who you hang out with. Does that mean we ignore those crazy people? Does that mean we ignore the people that are desperately in need of Jesus and their life shows it? No, we don't avoid them at all. But we don't let them be the influence in our life. We are the influence in their life. But when they start influencing our lives, that's when it turns disastrous. You see how quickly the Israelites turned and they aligned with the complaints of the rabble, those from outside the camp, from outside their nation. Complaining is contagious. Has anyone ever noticed that? Someone starts complaining, and you're like, "Oh, I can top that. I'll do you one better." And let me tell you this about them too. Okay, it's really easy to start complaining, and then it just spirals out of control, doesn't it? It's contagious. It's dangerous. So, what's their complaint now? What do we just read their complaint was? The food. Okay, the food. I don't. Not that I don't have any food. I want a steak. Legitimate. Okay.
I don't like Chick-fil-A. I want Culver's.
You go to Culver's. We're going to So they want meat. They want something different. They want variety. They want something else. Is it a problem that they had a desire for an additional type of food, something outside of that? Not really. I mean, to long for something else, that's fine. Hey God, if it's on the menu anytime soon, we get something.
The problem is that they act so entitled that they think they deserve whatever they want.
Yeah. So the problem is that it's not a request of God. It's not even a longing for it. It's the demand that they have that we deserve this. The entitlement, just like Christ said. And did you catch how this complaining is described in verse 4? The rabble who were among them had, what's the next two words? Greedy desires. Okay, so that tells us real quickly that they're not just saying, this sounds really good. You ever walk by the movie theater in Plant City and it's like, I could go for a big bucket of popcorn. That smells so good. Or you go to the festival and it's like, okay, everything smells good. I want it all. Put one of everything on my tray here. I want it all. It's not that they were just longing for that. They had a greedy desire. And the rabble's greedy desire was instantly adopted by Israel, and that's where the problem came. Here's the challenging thing. Where had they just come from? Where was their previous camp set up? At Sinai, where they had met with God, where they had just received the law of God, where they worshiped God, where they set up their tabernacle, where they were introduced to the priests and the sacrificial system and the worship of God. They had just come from that, and it doesn't appear that the Israelites' spiritual character was changed at all by their encounter with God.
It's similar to the people who quote unquote followed Jesus. They were fascinated by the miracle for a short time, but eventually they
lost interest. More. Yeah, they wanted more. They lost interest. If we're being honest, is it really very different from us, our culture? God, that was really cool that you provided this for me. Thank you for my salvation. Okay, it's getting a little old now. It's just not really striking my fancy about it. Maybe I'll just kind of drift away. Maybe I'll kind of do my own thing. But notice that they remember Egypt, but they have fond memories of Egypt here, don't they? They're like, dude, I can't believe we even left there. It was amazing. You remember the fish we could eat for free? How much do they pay for them? Okay, it's free. Okay? So it's not like they're getting ripped off here. Okay? You remember the fish we would eat? Leeks, onions, all. How many of you have ever said, if I could just bite into a crunchy onion right now? That would be, pick it up, eat it like an apple, right?
I do like onion, though.
Okay, so they're longing for Egypt. They're longing for the good old days. Life was so much better, and now all we have is this disgusting manna. That's all we have to eat every single day, all day long. They have a selective memory. Somehow they've forgotten about the bricks and the being beaten if they didn't find enough straw, and the kilns that were flaming hot that they would have to stand over in 100-degree temperatures.
And how
the beatings that they would face.
Crocodiles.
All that stuff. What do they remember instead?
Cucumbers.
Cucumbers. So I wrote down a note here, just be on guard because the complaining spirit of others will quickly draw you in. It'll quickly distract you. And a lot of Israelites in this encounter that we're going to see here find it to be deadly. It's destructive. When we complain, here's what we're doing. We're losing perspective on what we already have, and we focus on what we don't have. We've lost focus on what we already have, and we focus on the one thing we don't have. And that becomes our obsession. Have you read through the book of Esther? And then y'all read through the book of Esther. You remember the guy in there named Haman? Haman goes nuts so because one dude in the kingdom would not bow down to him. What does he have? He has a high position in the kingdom. He has a lofty position, a lot of influence, a lot of wealth. He's got it all by anyone's standards in that kingdom. And what drives him nuts? One dude will not bow down to him, so he devotes his life to getting that guy. He lost perspective. And what did it cost him? It cost him his life eventually. It cost him everything. It consumed his mind. It consumed his life. That one thing that he didn't have. Mordecai wouldn't bow to him. That's the one thing that consumed him. Rather than looking at, hey, that guy's a loser. But look at all that I have. Look at all that I have. So I want to give you a couple, because the theme of this section is clearly the cost of complaining. And so I want to look at a couple principles of complaining. A couple principles of complaining that we can easily connect to what we're reading here. First one, when you complain, you don't have the full story. You don't have the full story. If you're complaining about a person, here's something that I learned a long time ago and we taught our kids. For the people that drive you nuts, the people that kind of rub you, they're sandpaper people in your life, they rub you wrong, there's another piece to their story you don't understand it, you don't know. And if you knew it, it would make a whole lot more sense. You don't have the full story. You don't know it. You don't know everything. In their case, they're complaining about the food. And where do they want to be? They're longing to go back to Egypt. They're complaining about having to leave Egypt. But what's the thing that they don't, what's the piece of the story that they're not looking at? Why did God bring them out of Egypt?
Because they were being heavily abused.
Bigger picture than that. To bring them to the promised land. He has a place for them, already set aside and picked out. And he's bringing them to something bigger and better and somewhere that he has set up for them. But they've lost sight of that, and they're looking at the journey and not the destination. There's always more to the story that you don't have. Second thing, when you complain, you're not exhibiting faith. You're not exhibiting faith. Complaining is just venting. It's just just sharing an opinion. Sometimes you don't need to share your opinion. It's okay to not share your opinion, especially if it's a complaining one. You can keep it to yourself, believe it or not. It's probably better. Because the other option you could do is you could either complain and draw someone else into your complaining, or you could bring that concern to God. That's exhibiting faith. Okay, this is eating away at me. This is bugging me. God, I want to bring it to you. Third thing, when you complain, you're dragging someone else into your negative perspective. We've already talked about how easy it is to get sucked into their complaining. Do not be the initiator of that. Don't be the one dragging someone else in. Because when you complain, all you're doing is bringing someone else alongside you in your misery and in your sin.
Lincoln actually said, we're all as happy as we decide to be.
True. All right, fourth thing. When you complain, you're displaying arrogance. It's actually a very prideful thing to complain because What are they doing? They're challenging the goodness of God. They wouldn't come right out and say that, God, I can do better than you. But they're saying, God, I can do better than you. You messed up. You didn't know what you were doing. That's pretty arrogant, isn't it? They're displaying, it's an expression of arrogance. Take your complaining to the end, to the farthest reach. You're ultimately saying, if I was in charge, none of this would have happened. Everything would be great. Everyone would love everyone. Everyone would get along great, and we wouldn't have any problems if I was in charge, because I know all the answers. That's why I complain so much. No, you complain so much because you're whining. Okay? Not because you have all the answers. If you had all the answers, people would be coming to you for them and putting you in positions of leadership because you're so wise. Then what you got?
I heard something on video once. Worrying is thinking that God's not going to get it right. Bitter is thinking that God didn't get it right. Kind of relates.
Yeah. The same thought process. God, you messed up. You had a chance to get it right, and I don't know. Do better. Right? That's how we would say it if we're talking to somebody, our friend, brother, do better. Right? Fifthly, when you complain, you're spotlighting one negative aspect of a situation, a circumstance, in the midst of all of God's blessings. Last week, Ashton challenged y'all to be thankful, to write down things that you're thankful for. We were somewhere and someone's like, look at the clouds. How cool are the clouds here, folks? Right? Be thankful for the little things. Realize all the blessings in your life. When you're complaining, you're just focused on that one negative. Here's the other downside. Complaining, it never brings peace. If I complain hard enough, life will just get so much better. No, it doesn't. You complain hard enough, and then you get what you want, you're still dissatisfied. You get what you were upset about in the first place, and it doesn't fulfill you because it's just a negative attitude. It's just bitterness. It's not a provision issue, it's a heart issue. A theologian, his name is Charles Haddon Spurgeon. He said this, and I thought this is pretty good here. He said, the gift of grumbling is largely dispersed among those who have no other talents. Is that cool? Yeah. The gift of grumbling is largely dispersed among those who have no other talents. Isn't there something else you could be doing? Isn't there something more productive you could do than grumble? Isn't there something that these Israelites could have been doing other than, I wish we...
In the long run, complaining accomplishes nothing other than the endless restatement of a problem that is painfully obvious to everyone in the first place.
That, and it impacts your spiritual well-being too. Yeah. Okay, so first thing we see here is that the Israelites are complaining, they're murmuring in the camp, they're griping, they're upset, and the issue is food. The issue is food. Moses reaches out to God. And so in the next section, we're going to see Moses lament to God. And he pours his heart out. He's distraught because God and Moses are both angered by the loud and continuous, unceasing griping of the people. So let's look at verse 11 of Numbers chapter 11. So Moses said to the Lord. So Moses is kind of in God's face here. He's kind of like, God, come on. What's going on here? Moses said to the Lord, why have you been so hard on your servant, and why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all this people on me? Was it I who conceived all this people? Was it I who brought them forth, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a nurse carries a nursing infant to the land which you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat, give to all these people? For they weep before me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. Verse 14. I alone am not able to carry all this people because it is too burdensome for me. So, if you're going to deal thus with me, please kill me at once. If I've found favor in your sight, do not let me see my wretchedness. So Moses, in a pretty confrontational way, brings two concerns to God. First concern is he's discouraged in his calling. He says, Lord, it's too much for me. I cannot carry this massive group of people. I cannot be the one to nurture them and care for them and carry them through all of this. I can't do it. It's too much for me. And so if that's the plan you have for me, God, just know I can't do it. Find someone else. I resign. Take me out of this world if you need to, God. Whatever needs to happen. Second request he brought to God, or the second issue he brought to God, was they're demanding meat and I can't provide it. There's no physical way for me to provide meat for a couple million people. I can't do it, God. And that's the only way to stop their complaining, because they're demanding. How do we read it? They're greedy desires. They're demanding meat. So Moses brings these concerns to God. He's challenging God. He asks God some hard questions. And here's the cool thing, and I've said this before in here. I would encourage you to bring your hard questions, the things that you are challenged about. I would encourage you to bring them to God. Ask those tough questions. God is not intimidated by your difficult question. But the caveat I always add on to it, you're going to ask God tough questions. Stick around. Continue to seek Him to hear what He says in answer to your tough question. In this case, Moses does that. And God answers him right away. Let's look at God's response. God has two very different responses to the needs of Moses, and to the needs of Moses, and then to the needs of the people who are greedy. Let's look at verse 16. First thing we're going to see here in verse 16 is God's response to Moses. God blesses Moses. And it's a positive response to Moses, even after Moses kind of lashes out at God. He expresses his frustration. But how does he do it? He brings it directly to God. And so in verse 16, the Lord therefore said to Moses, gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel, who you know to be elders of the people, and their officers, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. Then I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take the Holy Spirit who is upon you, and will put him on them. And they shall also bear the burden of the people with you, so that you will not bear it alone. What's God's blessing for Moses here? How does God answer his prayer? He brings along 70 other men to share that burden. He brings along a blessing of other men to share that burden. They're going to be given the Spirit as Moses had, and they will be able to be a support for him and be able to come alongside him, and they'll be able to share the hardships that he's facing. So God blesses Moses. And so it kind of goes back and forth here in God's response. First, we have God's response to Moses, and then God's response to the Israelites. And then Moses' response back to God, and then the Israelites' response back to God. So God blesses Moses. How do you suppose he's responding? How do you suppose God's going to respond to the Israelites? That's probably not going to be pretty, is it? Does anybody else see that coming maybe? He judges the people. He judges the people. Let's look at verse 18. Say to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, Oh, that someone would give us meat to eat, for we were well off in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you, and you shall eat. You're like, wait, that sounds like they're getting just what they want. Exactly. They are. That sounds like a blessing. They've been eating manna, and now they're getting meat. Well, let's keep reading. You shall eat, not 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. Because, why? Because you have rejected the Lord who is among you, and you have wept before him, saying, Why did we ever leave Egypt? It's fascinating to me that the way God brings judgment on the Israelites is giving them exactly what they asked for. God, if you would just give us meat, we demand meat. Okay, it's going to be coming out. You're going to be sick of it. That's all you're going to have for 30 days straight. You're going to hate it. Wait till we read the rest of the story before you decide. You can go to that feast if you want to. Sometimes when we get what we ask for, it's the worst thing that could ever happen. Anybody ever hear the legend of King Midas?
Yes, I love that story.
Everything he touches turns to what?
Gold. And then he can't eat anything because everything he touches turns to gold.
His blessing becomes, the thing he asked for becomes the curse of his life because he hugs his daughter and she turns to solid gold. He can't eat because everything he picks up to eat turns to gold. And so he dies a miserable man because he has all the gold in the world.
That is not true. That is not true. The god Dionysus lifted the curse and he was able to live out the rest of his days.
Okay, I'm talking about one version of it. So I knew you were going to correct me on that. I almost didn't do it, but I'll take my chances with right. Okay. So God says to them, I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for. I'm going to give you meat. You're going to have meat and nothing else. You're not going to know what to do because there's so much meat. I love that phrase. It will be coming out your nostrils. I don't know what that looks like, but it sounds like too much. That's all I'm saying. It sounds like overkill. And he addresses the heart attitude that he's judging. What's the heart attitude? They longed for Egypt. That wasn't God's plan for them. That wasn't God's direction for them. They longed for something. They longed to go back into slavery. They longed to go back to life before God had delivered them. That's what they were longing for. That's what their heart's cry was. God wanted to bring them into the land that he had promised. They wanted to go back to a land of slavery, abuse. In their demand to have meat, they were ultimately rejecting the Lord. Okay? So God blesses Moses. He brings men alongside of him to share the burden. He curses or he brings judgment on Israel. He says, I'm going to bring you so much meat that it's going to be sickening to you. I think it was China was telling me she did at the festival, she did the donut contest one time. How many think that sounds awesome? You notice China didn't raise her hand? Because you eat so much of that, it's like, I don't want to see another donut. Yeah. That is bragging rights for sure. But even the good things can be too much of it. It's possible. So how does Moses respond? God gives him these 70 men to come alongside him to share the spiritual burden of living or of leading the people. And we see Moses responds in humility. We've got a little, kind of a big section here to read. But let's take a look at this next section. Let's jump to verse 24. So, God answers with his reply to Moses and his reply about the people and how he's going to provide for them. So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord. Also, he gathered 70 men, the elders of the people, and stationed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and he took of the Spirit who was upon him, and placed him, the Spirit, upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied. So they started speaking God's truth to the people. Okay, so they prophesied. And they did not do it again. It was just a sign of God's anointing, God's hand on their life, that these are the ones that I've chosen. Verse 26, but 2 men had remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the other was Medad. And the Spirit rested upon them. Now, they were among those who had been registered, but had not gone out to the tent. And they prophesied in the camp. So they hadn't come to the tent where everyone else was, but God's like, no, you're two of the ones that I've selected. Even though you're not at the meeting with everyone else, you're two of the ones that have been chosen. And so the Spirit of God came on them. And so they spoke and they prophesied within the camp, not at this tent, whatever, wherever this meeting place was. Jump down to verse 28. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, the attendant of Moses from his youth, said, Moses, my Lord, restrain them, these 2 men. They're prophesying. They're in the camp. They're prophesying. They're doing what you do, Moses. Stop them. See that little protectiveness of Joshua. What do you want me to do? I got to shut them down somehow because they're doing your job. But Moses said to him, verse 29, are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people prophets, that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. What was Moses saying here? I would love it if all of Israel was speaking God's truth to one another. I would love it if every person here was taking a leadership role and was being a positive spiritual influence on the people around them. There's no limit on that. I'm not jealous of that. Joshua, don't be jealous on my behalf, because this isn't a one-man show by any means. It's easy as you start doing ministry in your life, and I encourage you all to be plugged in. Plug in somewhere. God wants to use you. Some of you will be within your church. Some of you will be something outside the church. Some of you are planning to go overseas and do ministry. Some of you, whatever. But be plugged into ministry. But here's what will happen in ministry is you'll see God using someone else. And you can have one or two responses to that. Dude, why wasn't that me? Someone. Or, yay, God. That is awesome. I'm excited that you did that. I'm excited that God was able to use you. That is amazing. It's easy to be jealous, though. When you get involved in God's work, there's a lot to be shared. There's a lot of work to do. But it's multiplied, it's not divided. Let me phrase it a different way. I wrote down here. It isn't like a pie. It's like okay, so if I had a pie here and I wanted to share it with you, the more I share it, the less pie I have for myself. That's how some people view ministry. The more someone else does it, the less attention is on me, the less I get. Change the analogy. What if ministry is a flame? I have a candle here, and it's a flame, and I share it with someone else. Did my flame get half the size? No, the flame on my candle is exactly the same. So is theirs. And then I share it with someone else. And it never gets smaller. It never goes away. I never run out. That's ministry. That's the work of God's kingdom. We're not in competition with each other in God's kingdom work. There's plenty to do. This world needs every one of you to make an impact. So don't get jealous. Don't get in a competitive mode. My church is better than your church. My ministry is better than your ministry. I wanted to do that, and I wanted to be the one to lead them to the Lord. I can't believe you did that. How rude. That's the spirit, right? So how does Moses respond? He responds in humility. He responds with a ministry heart of, let them do God's work. How awesome is that? So Moses responds in humility, and it's a stark contrast to how the Israelites respond. God told Moses, I'm going to give you a blessing, and Moses responded in humility. God told the Israelites, had Moses tell the Israelites, I'm going to give you a cursing, I'm going to give you so much meat that you're not going to know what to do with it. So let's look at their greed. The Israelites' greed, Numbers 11:31. Now, there went forth a wind from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp. About a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground. The people spent all day and all night and all the next day and gathered quail. He who gathered the least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. While the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. So the name of that place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried people within grief. Preston, you still want to go to this feast? No, you're good now. Okay. I figured you'd change that. So quail, small game bird, very highly coveted by hunters and people. Yep. I've never had quail. Does anyone here have quail? Wait, I did? It was a long time ago if I did. It's like
Yes,
first.
we
Still counts.
and my
Oh, I still count.
Still have
Okay. Okay, I have had quail. I don't remember having quail. But like my father-in-law loves to hunt. That's one of his favorite things. Quail that he's ever hunted. So what's going on? These quail are flying. It says in the New American Standard, it says they're about 3 feet deep, like they're piled up. That's probably not the best description. They're probably flying about 3 feet high. If you got the ESV, it says they're 3 feet above the ground. And that's probably a more accurate definition or description, rather than piled 3 feet high for a day's walk in every direction. That's kind of gross. So so they're flying, and so God promised they would have plenty of meat. If you walk for a day's walk, how far can you walk in a day? I don't know, a long way. A day's walk in any direction, everywhere you walk, there's quail flying everywhere, right at 3 feet above the ground. Super easy to catch. Take a club and bonk them over the head, throw them in your bag, move on, right? Okay? And I got my meat. But here's where the greed kicks in. They didn't take a cue and move on. They didn't grab a meal and say, thank you, God. What did they do? How does it describe their quail gathering efforts here? They did it all day long. They did it. All through the night and all the next day. They continually got quail. That's a lot of quail. How much quail is it? 10 homers, okay? 10 homers of quail. That means a lot. Okay? So I looked it up, and there's 10 homers of quail that the person who got the least got. I'm going to share this with you because it's kind of funny. And 1 homer equals 6 baths. Okay, that doesn't. 1 bath equals 6 of this. That doesn't help either. 6 of this equals 12 of this. That doesn't help. And 6 of those equals 24 eggs. Like, oh, finally, we got a... Okay, so a basket that would hold 24 eggs is like... Okay, so here's what 10 homers mean of quail. We'll put it in our terms. Okay? The person who got the least amount of quail, the loser on the quail hunting journey, got 19,100 quail. 1,900 birds. 1,900 birds. That's more than a meal. That's crazy. That's 475 pounds of quail. For one person. That's one person, and that's the loser. Okay? Everyone's making fun of him. Not. George, you only have 10 bats. Okay? Or 10 homers. 475 pounds of quail for one person. They gathered that. That's nuts. See where that word greed kind of kicks back in here? It's a little overkill. A little bit overkill. They celebrated with a meat feast. They laid their meat out all over the camp. They celebrated their meat. They were thrilled with their catch, and they were going to have the biggest feast ever. But before they could even chew the first bite, what happened? God brought a severe plague. God brought a severe plague. Many of them died. Why did God judge them so severely? They thought they knew better than him. What was going on in their heart? It's interesting because their sin is memorialized in the name of in what they named the place. Kibroth Hattaavah. It's there in verse 34. Kibroth Hattaavah. That means the graves of greediness. For the tombs of craving. Those who were so greedy that it consumed their life. They died because that was their sin. That was the issue. We're going to see, follow up with this in another event of complaining next week, that their complaining keeps this entire generation of Israelites from entering the promised land. Their complaining, their lack of faith in God keeps them from entering the land that God had promised them. And for many of them, it cost them their life in some tragic way. God has a whole lot, the calling God has for us is a whole lot higher than what we're seeing here. What you got, man?
I think it's easy to say that they were really greedy for taking that much, but I thought like an analogy. If we had the opportunity to take money from, say, like we just had piles of money in front of us and it's free for us to take, we probably wouldn't take enough to pay rent or pay our parking. We'd take millions of dollars just because we don't need that much, but we would take it. It's there. Why not?
It was there, yeah.
And that's a good analogy. That's what we see.
Right. And that's if that's what we have been greedy for, and
to be fair, it does make you feel more secure.
It's a false security, but
I said it makes you feel more secure. It doesn't make you more secure.
Good distinction there. But God has a whole lot higher calling for us than what we're seeing here in the Israelites. Let me read you a couple verses from Philippians chapter 2. I'm going to read Philippians 2, verses 14 and 15. And Paul gives this warning to the believers in this church. He says, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing." Do all things without grumbling. Don't let it enter your world. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. Why? Verse 15. So that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked, perverse generation among whom you appear as lights. God has a whole lot higher calling for you than you to be a complainer and a grumbler and dragging everyone else down with your bad attitude. God has called you to be holy and pure and the light of the world and to make a difference in the lives of others. This week, I actually got 5 things this week. Physically, yeah, you guys are going to be busy. All right, 5 things for you this week. First one, look up and read some passages warning against grumbling. I'm not going to give them to you. I want you to go find some passages in God's Word. There's dozens of them. Go find some. What does God teach you? Why does God warn against it? What's the downside of grumbling? Find some passages and kind of see what God shows you about grumbling, a grumbling spirit, a heart of discontentment. Second thing along that line is seek contentment. Later on in this letter that Paul wrote to the Philippians, in chapter 4, verse 11, he says, I have learned to be content in every circumstance. And this always puzzled me. He said, whether I've got a lot or whether I've got little. I'm like, it's easy to be content when you got a lot. Not really. This contentment's a heart attitude, not a bank account. It's a heart attitude. Paul says, I've been content when I've had it. Because I always have. Contentment is basically being more aware of what you have. It's being more focused on the things God has given you and not focusing on the things that you wish God had. That's contentment. Number 3, choose gratitude. Choose gratitude because if you're proactively thanking God for the blessings in your life, there's no way you can grumble and complain at the same time. It can't happen. So choose to be grateful. What you got, Preston?
I'll say choosing gratitude. That's the last one. Finding the small things.
Yep.
That's grumble.
You came up with that one. Yeah. All right. Number 4. So choose gratitude. Number 4, bring your adversity to God. There are times that you're going to have a legitimate need. There's going to be times that there's a real hurt and a real pain point in your life. Don't gripe about it to everyone else. Bring it to God. Yeah, you can talk about it with other people, but what's the hard attitude behind it? Bring your adversity to God. Number 5, encourage others to encourage. Encourage others. Encourage. How do you do that? How do you encourage someone else to be an encourager? Best way is to model it. Don't yell at them about being an encourager. We had this in the book of Ephesians. It talks about building people up. He uses the word edify one way. And our saying in our friend group in college was edify, stupid. Okay, so kind of a contradiction there in that sentence, that statement. But edify, build others up. Because that is also contagious. A positive outlook, an encouraging word is a contagious thing. And even if others don't catch on, they will look forward to seeing you because you're going to bring a word of encouragement, a positive perspective. Let's pray. God, I thank you for this challenge to our heart attitudes. We trust you in all circumstances. Trust you in times that we have circumstances that we don't know the way. And to guard against grumble, any bitter spirit, greediness. I just ask you, your word, point out to us areas to grow, ways we can focus more on gratitude, encouragement. Amen. See you, Chick-fil-A, Trey.
See ya.
We're not getting this.
Yeah.